Encryption and steganography are essential skills for any security professional nowadays. So if you are a little iffy on that, you should stick around because we're having that conversation starting right now.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
Greetings and welcome back to Security Plus here at IT Pro TV. And today we are discussing encryption and steganography, a little bit of that action happening here as well. And today we gotta learn a little bit about those basics. We have to understand encryption before we can have larger conversations about how to employ it correctly and use it effectively in a secure environment. And Wes, you're going to help us out with that. You're going to teach us, Obi-Wan, because you are our only hope.
That's right.
Because this stuff is hard.
It is. And you know, Dan, one of the things that we did is we decided to carve some of these topics up into shorter chunks, because one of the things Dan and I were looking at is that, you know, in portions of cryptology, or cryptography, excuse me, that we go through, right, there's a lot of stuff that we have to know. So what we try to do is just chunk these up into more manageable units. So like Dan says, we're going to talk about encryption first, and let's go ahead and let's dive in by talking about what encryption is. Encryption is how we basically achieve confidentiality, right? Remember we talked about the CIA triad. Confidentiality part is that if Dan and I are authorized users, and I send information to Dan, that only he as an authorized user is going to be able to consume or use that information, and that an unauthorized part, or I guess actor, if you will, bad actor, threat actor, or just anybody that's unauthorized doesn't have access to the information. Now what's interesting is that encryption itself doesn't hide the fact that data's there. We know the data's there, right? So for instance, if we're out there and we are doing some packet capture, like we'll talk about in upcoming episodes, and having various attacks like man in the middle attacks, if I'm capturing that information, I know the information's there. All right. The thing I don't know is what is in the information, right? It's the fact that encryption makes it incomprehensible. In fact, I heard one security guru, a lot smarter than I is, says, take your good information and turn it into gibberish so that nobody can view what that information is. So that's the basis of encryption. It allows us to achieve the C, or the confidentiality part of the CIA triad.
All right, so now we know what encryption is. It's where we take our data, and we're not, like Wes said, we're not hiding it per se. We're just making it unintelligible. So if I were to find it on the street, I would go, this is a bunch of gobbledygook that means nothing to me. That's what we want to do with it. Now the trick is, how do we do that? How do we make it unintelligible to any passerby, but readable by you or I that are in the know?
All right, bunch of math made by people that are a lot smarter than me.
And I'm out.
Yeah, that's right, absolutely. When we start talking about math where they're adding numbers and letters, I am out. Now, we have to understand that we're going to look at the basic process. Ladies and gentlemen, for the Security Plus exam, you don't have to know exactly how the operation works. You have to identify what encryption is, the difference between strong and weak encryption, but definitely know what the basic process is here. Let me show you what I mean here. So we've got a person that needs to send some kind of confidential information, like for instance, this is my message, right? That is what is known as clear or plain text. You'll hear those terms kind of used interchangeably. Clear text, we can read it. Plain text, we can read it, right? What we ended up doing is we take a cipher, all right? And a cipher is just a mathematical operation. And again, I'm not going to get into the mathematics of it because I really don't understand it, but it is applied to your information, right? And when it's applied to your information, that information is transformed into that gibberish, or the gobbledygook like Dan called it, right? Something that we cannot read. And that changes what's known as clear text into something known as ciphertext. And you have to understand that this can apply, well, we've kind of seen it already, to a message, right? Communications, if I'm communicating to Dan over the network, right? That's going to be something known as encrypt. We need to encrypt that information while it's in transit. We can also encrypt that information when it's stored. That's called data at rest. We need to make sure that it stays encrypted. And we also have data that's in use. For instance, data that's being used in your applications. So there's three states that your information can be in. When we talk about encryption, we talk about data in transit. We encrypt that communication, typically over network communications, data at rest, and that's usually stored within your hard drives or your storage systems, right? That's data at rest. And then data in use, we protect through encryption. And that's where it's at the application level, not layer, not necessarily application layer of the OSI model, but the application itself is going to provide some level of protection and confidentiality for your data.
Now, Wes, I'm pretty sure there are a few different types of ciphers, because you were mentioning how we're using ciphers to basically jumble that mess up, create that ciphertext so that we can apply it to in rest, in motion, or in use. But we probably need to be familiar with the different types of ciphers.
That's right.
Break it down for us.
Sure. So you have two different types of ciphers themselves. You have what are known as stream ciphers, and you have what are known as block ciphers, and that's how they're actually encrypting the information. Not necessarily the algorithms individually, but just how they group the information or don't group the information together. Let me show you what I mean. So if we start out with a stream cipher, I want you to know that a stream cipher takes and it encrypts information byte by byte, all right? And it's important to understand that we're literally doing this byte by byte, so character by character, if you will. That's essentially what a stream cipher is. Now, if we look and we do a little bit of comparison to what's known as a block cipher, block ciphers take groupings of your information and encrypt that grouping of information, if you will, not on a byte by byte basis, but hence the term block by block basis. Why they call it a block cipher. It's typically a 64-bit chunk of your information, and there are other higher. Usually it starts out at least 100 or 64-bit chunks, right? And then it goes higher from there. So that is your stream and your block cipher. Remember, a byte-by-byte encryption for stream ciphers and a block or a grouping, if you will, of your information when we talk about block ciphers. And it is important to understand what are some of the comparisons between the two. So I got a little chart here for you, and it's really just a lot of information that you're going to have to memorize. So take your time, pause the video if you have to, and write down some notes, make some flashcards. Stream ciphers, plain text to ciphertext, and it's usually 1 byte at a time. We have plain text to ciphertext for a block cipher, and that is typically 64 bits and higher. Now, theoretically, they say that it's easier to reverse. I'm not going to be able to reverse either of these. I don't have the mathematical know-how, but technically it's easier to reverse a stream cipher than it is a block cipher. And then when we look at computational power, that's also something that you have to keep in mind, that a stream cipher is going to be faster than a block cipher. So definitely know those comparisons when we compare stream cipher to block cipher in case they ask you some of the attributes of that encryption type on the exam.
All right, good stuff. Now we've got a little bit of a comparison. We can figure out, oh, well, that's a stream cipher, that's a block cipher. Pretty simple to understand the difference between the two there. But there are also modes of operation that we need to be prepared for as well, right, Wes?
Absolutely. So when we talk about your block ciphers, right, for the most part, a grouping of these bits together and doing the block encryption like it does, for the most part, is really safe, right? But what they do is they alternate how exactly those blocks with the algorithm are going to be operated on. So they try to achieve more randomness. Remember, any predictability in encryption is going to give somebody like Dan sitting next to me a chance to kind of analyze those similarities and maybe reverse engineer it, right? So block ciphers in and of themselves are strong, but they can add these different modes of operation that try to increase the strength of them. And one of the first ones has been around. And again, know these for the exam. You don't have to know the individual functionality of them and how exactly they're handling the bits, the blocks, if you will. But there's what's known as ECB. And this is one of the oldest, and it's one of the weakest when you look at your block ciphers. Next one is a cipher block chaining. You might hear it called CBC. CBC is interesting because it actually takes the encrypted block and feeds that into the next block and then feeds it, and you get this chain, right? It's interesting that one bit that's errors in the first block, when it's fed into the next one, the error is going to be present into that block too, and then likewise down the chain. So it is interesting in the fact, keep in mind that errors can affect the whole chain. Now, there's another one here, and actually, let me go ahead and just tell you about these next two, because really the next two, what I want you to understand is that cipher feedback and output feedback, they really allow a block cipher to kind of function a little bit like a stream cipher in general. The last one is one of the most strongest ones, and these ones here are all pre-AES. Today in AES, we use things like one of the strongest one today, and that's CTR. That's counter mode. And again, it's the more common one and one of the strongest of the modes of operation out of all the ones that are attached to the different block ciphers. So be able to recognize on the exam they're definitions, I realize, and a lot of times definitions are like exercise, and you can tell I don't really care for exercise, right? It hurts a little bit, but once you get them under your belt, you'll be doing good for the exam.
Well, Wes, I think you did a great job, because that's really what we need to know, just the basics on how these different types of encryptions work, difference between stream and block ciphering, and you should be squared away. Now, we did tell you that this is not just an encryption episode, it is a steganography show. We're going to talk a little bit about steganography, which is a lot of the bane of my existence in a lot of ways for some of the stuff that I do. But for a threat or a bad actor, this is a great way to hide and exfiltrate data. Explain us, if you would, please, sir.
Absolutely.
What we mean when we say steganography.
You know, so one of the things that we mentioned, Dan, is when we said encryption, we mentioned that when we encrypt information, we're not hiding the fact that the data is there, all right? Let me say that I'm sending information in and out of like a database, and we're doing it securely. Dan's out there, and he's doing a penetration test, again, authorized on our network, and he's saying, man, I'm grabbing that information. Well, he knows the information's there, but he can't actually see the information. So what is it that makes this kind of a bane, to Dan's point? Well, this isn't, I want to show you, this doesn't really hide the fact, or this doesn't encrypt the message at all, but it hides the fact that the data's even there. It hides it in plain sight. And that's important. Let me give you an example. And again, just a high-level overview, right? So here's my message. If we take this message, and of course we've got this lovely picture of cute little kittens, and we embed that message into the image, your eye cannot pick up on the fact that the image isn't there. There are so many bits of information that's in that image right now that if we could take some of the bits out of that image that would not leave it perceptible to the human eye, but use those bits to store the information, then I can send that picture to Dan, and anybody that's out there on the wire trying to capture that information, if they're not aware, first of all, that there's a message there, the message is there, but it's hidden. You can't actually see. You have to use pieces of software that can extract this information out of this image. Now, that doesn't mean that it's only images. This can also be done to audio and video as well. And again, using a lot of those bits, think about things like lossful compression. Right, we can compress certain information and leave out certain bits, right? Because when we rebuild that information, the bits that are removed, we can't really perceive they're there. Well, imagine not dropping those bits. Imagine taking a program that could take those bits that you would know, hey, we could probably leave those off and you'd be unaware, but now we use them as containers to store information within our messages, and we send that information over to another user. This is where they feel things like terrorists can actually basically communicate in open sight through unsecure channels, and people are none the wiser. So just know a little bit about steganography and what it is. I always want to say stegography. It's steganography. I got it right. And be able to know the difference between encryption and steganography. One, doesn't hide the fact that the message there, makes it scrambled so you can't discern what it actually says. Steganography doesn't hide the fact that the information's there. It hides it in plain sight.
That's right. Big words, ladies and gentlemen, and that's why I just say stego. Hopefully now you understand a bit of that concept, and maybe even are incited to go play with some tools, do some steganography of your own, see how this works, get your hands dirty, have a little fun doing it too. So really cool. It makes you feel like a spy, doesn't it? Well, there you go. There's encryption and steganography today. You looked at a couple of really cool stuff that you need to know for the Security Plus exam to be successful. And now you've got the information you need to do that very thing. That being said, we are out of info for this specific episode, but we have plenty more to come in Security Plus. So join us then. Until then, have yourself a great day.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.